I knew something was off the moment I pulled into my driveway, and my dog didn't come barreling down the walk to greet me. Cooper never missed. Rain, shine, hailstorm, solar eclipse, it didn't matter. That shaggy mutt always came running the second he heard my truck. But that afternoon? Nothing. Just silence, and the low hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. I jumped out of the truck, left the groceries in the cab, and started calling his name. Cooper.
Coop.
Where are you, boy? No jingle of his collar.
No bark. No po tumping the excitement.
Just the sound of my voice bouncing off the empty porch. I ran around the back. Gate was wide open. Now, I always lock that gate. Every single morning when I leave for work at the auto shop, I check it. Cooper's a rescue. Half husky, half who knows what, and he loves to dig. Can't risk him running off. But the latch was undone and swinging like someone had yanked it open. Cooper. I shouted again, panic creeping in. That's when I heard her voice like nails on a chalkboard dipped in entitlement. Well, maybe if you followed the community leash policy, this wouldn't have happened, Peter. I turned, and there she was, Cheryl Danvers, HOA president. 50-something, bleach blonde bob, fake tan, and an attitude that could sour milk. She stood at the end of her driveway, arms crossed like she was waiting for applause. You see my dog? I asked, already knowing she had something to do with this. She raised an eyebrow. I rescued him. He was loose. Again. That's the third time this month. That's impossible, and you know it, I snapped.
He doesn't get out.
Not unless someone opens the gate. Well, someone clearly didn't secure it properly, she said, looking down her nose at me. And the HOA bylaws are very clear about off-leash animals. Section 7, paragraph 3. Your dog's a danger to the community. He's not dangerous. He barked at me last week. You were banging on my door at 6 in the morning to deliver a warning notice. For what, Cheryl? My mailbox being too rustic? She didn't flinch. It didn't match community aesthetic standards. And now your dog is in a safe place until you can prove you're a responsible owner. I stepped closer. Where is he? I'm holding him. At my house. The board agreed it was the best course of action. You're holding him? He's not a stray, Cheryl. He's my family. That's theft. She shrugged. Call it what you want. But until you attend the next board meeting and resolve your fines, Cooper stays with me. I was shaking furious, shocked, and honestly stunned she'd say it out loud like that. You're not allowed to do that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I am the HOA president. I enforce the rules. You should be thanking me. I turned on my heel and marched back to my front door, fists clenched. I didn't care what made-up bylaw she was quoting. I knew one thing for sure: Cheryl Danvers had just stolen my dog, and I was going to get him back. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I combed through every document I had on the neighborhood HOA. This wasn't just about Cooper anymore. Cheryl had been pulling this garbage for years: fabricated fines, threats of foreclosure over minor infractions, and now she'd crossed a line. I pulled up the city's pet ordinances. Then the HOA's articles of incorporation. Then the state's property and theft laws. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew how to read legalese. And I knew people. By morning, I had a plan. First, I emailed our local animal control and filed a report. Then I called the police and filed a theft report. Cheryl might think her HOA badge gave her immunity, but the law didn't agree. When the officer came by, I showed him everything: photos of Cooper in my yard, vet records, microchip info, and the security footage from my Ring camera. Sure enough, at 3 in the afternoon the day before, Cheryl had walked right into my backyard, unlatched the gate, and coaxed Cooper out with a treat before walking off with him on a pink leash. You're telling me she just walked into your yard? The officer asked, eyebrows raised. Like she owned the place. That's trespassing and theft, he said, writing it all down. And you've got it all on video? Yup. I emailed you the file. He nodded. We'll be paying Ms. Danvers a visit. By noon, 2 uniformed officers and I were standing on Cheryl's pristine front lawn. Her house looked like a Pottery Barn catalog threw up on it white shutters, seasonal wreath, and a flag that said, "Live, laugh, love." She opened the door like she hadn't just kidnapped someone's dog. "Officers," she said, all fake sweetness. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Ma'am, we have a report that you took a resident's dog from his private property," one of the officers said. Her smile didn't falter. "I rescued him. He was loose and violating HOA rules. I informed Mr. Prescott that I was holding the dog until he attended his hearing." "Ma'am, you can't remove a pet from private property without the owner's consent. That's theft." "I don't think you understand. I am the HOA. And we're the police," the officer said flatly. "Do you have the dog?" Her eyes narrowed for a split second. "He's in the guest room. But I don't appreciate this aggression. I'll be contacting our HOA attorney. Please bring the dog out now." She stood stiff for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the house. 5 minutes later, she came back with Cooper on a leash. His tail wagged the second he saw me, and he nearly dragged Cheryl down the steps trying to get to me. "Hey, buddy," I said, kneeling to catch him. "I missed you too." The officer took the leash from her and handed it over to me. "You're free to go, sir. We'll handle it from here." I gave Cheryl one last look. "You messed with the wrong guy." She didn't respond, just stood there, jaw clenched, watching her power slip out of her hands. That night, I got a call from Officer Green, the same one who came to my house. "Just wanted you to know," he said, "we're submitting the case to the county prosecutor. Between the trespassing, theft, and the video evidence, it's a slam dunk." "Good," I said. "She's been weaponizing that HOA for years." "Well, she might be facing more than just charges." "What do you mean?" "We pulled some records. You're not the first neighbor she's threatened. And it turns out she's been issuing fines that aren't even in the official bylaws. Some of them went to collections. We're opening up a wider investigation into the HOA's financial practices." I couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, officer. Keep me posted." "Oh, we will." When I looked down at Cooper, curled up on the couch beside me, it hit me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If Cheryl wanted to play games using the HOA, then I was going to pull the whole curtain back and expose every trick she'd been hiding behind. And next time, she wouldn't just be handing over a stolen dog. She'd be handing over her title, and maybe even her freedom. 2 days after Cooper came home, I found an envelope duct taped to my front door. No postage, no return address, just my name printed in sharp, angry letters across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper and emergency assessment notice from the HOA. According to it, I now owed $475 for neighborhood disruption, unauthorized accusations against a board member, and legal obstruction of HOA process. I read it twice, then a third time just to be sure I hadn't accidentally wandered into a satire. The kicker? It was signed by Cheryl Danvers and unanimously approved by a board that, as far as I knew, hadn't met since the last neighborhood garage sale. I wasn't about to let that fly. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Miguel Alvarez. He was a retired city clerk who'd lived across the street for 15 years and still knew how to pull municipal records like a magician pulling scarves out of a top hat. "Pete," he said, "I've been watching this woman pull strings since she got voted in. You want to see something interesting?" I walked over that afternoon. Miguel's kitchen table was a paper battlefield printouts, maps, old HOA meeting minutes, and highlighted emails all spread out like a case board from a detective show. He grabbed a binder and slid it toward me. "See this?" he said, tapping the page. HOA bylaws require all financial assessments to be approved during a public meeting with at least 7 days' notice to members. No notice, no meeting, no vote? It's not legal. She just duct taped it to my door, I said. She's been doing that to others too. Look here, 3 years ago, she tried to charge old Mrs. Fry $70 a day for hanging her laundry on the back fence. Never went through a vote. I filed a complaint with the city back then, but nobody followed up. Miguel handed me a yellowing manila folder marked HOA Records Unofficial. Inside were complaints, anonymous letters, and copies of checks made out to Neighborhood Beautification Project. According to Miguel, that project didn't actually exist. I think she's been laundering money through fake fines, he said. But nobody's had the proof to take it to the city attorney. I leafed through one of the letters. It was from a former board member who'd stepped down suddenly 2 years ago. The letter accused Cheryl of threatening to expose his undocumented home renovations if he didn't sign off on a series of inflated maintenance expenses. You think she's blackmailing people? I think she's been running this HOA like a private kingdom. And now she's panicking because you brought the cops into it. That's when I realized this went far deeper than just my dog. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the county recorder's office. I included Miguel's evidence, my own footage of Cheryl trespassing, and a notarized statement from a neighbor who'd overheard Cheryl bragging about not needing approval to issue fines because people are too dumb to fight back. Later that same afternoon, I was contacted by Detective Lorna Kessler from the County Fraud Division. She asked if I could come down to her office. When I arrived, she had a printed copy of the HOA's annual budget and a spreadsheet on her screen that didn't match any reported numbers. We've been following breadcrumbs on this HOA since a complaint came in last year, she said. But the video you submitted gave us enough probable cause to start digging properly. What's the plan now? We're executing a search warrant on her residence and the HOA's storage unit. We've also subpoenaed bank records tied to the HOA management account.
Ist sehr her.
You're raiding her house? Tomorrow morning. And we'd like you available to positively identify any documents related to your case, especially anything involving the false fines. At precisely 8 o'clock the next day, 2 cruisers and an unmarked van rolled into the neighborhood. I stood across the street with Miguel as officers in tactical vests stepped onto Cheryl's front lawn. They knocked once, then again louder. When the door cracked open, Cheryl's voice floated out, high and indignant. You can't just barge into my home. One of the officers read out the warrant loud enough for half the block to hear. The moment the words "financial fraud investigation" left his mouth, a curtain twitched on nearly every window in sight. They were inside for over an hour. Officers came out with boxes, bank statements, file folders, even a desktop computer wrapped in an evidence bag. Then came the kicker. One of the officers emerged carrying a small, locked metal case. Detective Kessler approached me with a clipboard. We found this in a cabinet labeled Pet Issues. Recognized the handwriting. It was Cheryl's, unmistakably ornate and overdone. The case contained laminated incident reports she'd fabricated about Cooper. Each one had wild claims, aggressive behavior, property damage, and one that accused him of emotional harassment. None were dated. None were signed by witnesses. That's all made up, I said. Completely fabricated. That's what we figured. She's been creating false reports to justify her actions. That crosses into criminal fraud. As the officers loaded the last box into the van, Cheryl appeared on the porch, flanked by 2 detectives. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time since I met her, she didn't look smug, she looked small, like someone finally realizing the ground beneath them wasn't solid. She didn't speak as they led her to the car, but the entire block watched. People stepped out onto their lawns. A few whispered. A few didn't bother, hiding their applause. Later that evening, Kessler called me with an update. We found records of over $20,000 in unapproved fines cashed through a personal account. She's being charged with embezzlement, falsification of records, and theft. I exhaled slowly. How long could she serve? Depends on the judge. But this isn't just going away quietly. The fallout unfolded quickly. The remaining board members resigned within a week. Turns out, most of them had been pressured into silence, threatened with citations or fines if they didn't comply. One of them, a young teacher named Dana, came by to apologize personally. I wanted to push back, but she made it clear she'd come after my job, she said. I should have stood up sooner. You're standing up now, I told her. A special meeting was called by the city's Housing Oversight Committee. Miguel and I attended along with nearly half the neighborhood. I presented the documents, the videos, and copies of the fake notices Cheryl had distributed. One by one, others came forward, some with stories of intimidation, some with evidence of manipulated invoices. The committee voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA leadership and appoint a temporary oversight administrator, while a new board could be fairly elected. It wasn't just a win. It was a purge. As I walked home that night, Cooper trotting beside me, several neighbors waved. A few even thanked me out loud. The street felt lighter, like a storm had passed. I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted to come home and see my dog waiting at the gate. But if exposing one corrupt bully meant the rest of us could finally breathe, then I'd do it all over again. And next time someone tried to weaponize a clipboard and a title, they'd think twice before messing with this neighborhood. A week after Cheryl was taken into custody, the neighborhood felt like it had collectively exhaled for the first time in years. Her wrought iron mailbox, always polished to a mirror shine, sat crooked now, one hinge dangling like a broken jaw. No one bothered to fix it. A patch of weeds sprang up beside her walkway, and the "Community Pride Starts Here" sign she'd planted in her flower bed had toppled over in the wind, face down in the dirt. The temporary oversight administrator, a woman named Gloria Levins from the County Housing Oversight Board, had set up shop in the community center. She was no-nonsense, barrel-voiced, and wore orthopedic sneakers that squeaked quietly wherever she went. On her third day, she called me in for a review of what she called the procedural damage. "Peter, you're familiar with the board's inner workings now more than most," she said, flipping through a folder thick with audit notes. "You up for helping us rebuild this place?" "I'm not looking to run an HOA," I said. "I just wanted my dog back."
Good.
"That means you're not power-hungry. Makes you a better candidate than most." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. That same afternoon, Miguel flagged me down from across the street, waving a manila envelope in one hand and his phone in the other. His face looked like it had been carved out of stone. "I just got this from the county prosecutor's office," he said, handing me the envelope. "They're bringing additional charges against Cheryl." I opened it, eyes scanning the legalese.
Forgery.
Coercion. Misappropriation of community funds. And the big one-wire fraud. I looked up at him.
Wire fraud?
That wasn't even on the radar.
It is now, Miguel said.
Turns out Cheryl set up a shadow account years ago under the name of a defunct landscaping company. The HOA would hire them for work pruning shrubs, replacing pavers, but the funds went to a P.O. box registered in her maiden name. How much? Just north of $68,000. I let out a low breath. She siphoned that much, and still had the gall to tape fake fines to people's doors, I muttered.
Miguel nodded.
You know what the kicker is? Most of that landscaping work was done by volunteers from the community. She billed the HOA for work we did ourselves. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. Cooper lay at my feet, tail thumping gently every now and then when I dropped a piece of jerky into his mouth. I sifted through the audit report Gloria had given me, highlighting key sections. One entry caught my eye, an invoice marked Pet Safety Initiative. The amount? Over $1,200. The description? Contingency holding and emergency transport for dangerous animals. That was the line item Cheryl used to justify taking Cooper. Buried in a sea of false expenses, it had slipped through unnoticed until now. The next morning, I called Detective Kessler.
There's something new, I said.
You need to see it in context. She met me at the community center, where I laid out the audit notes and the matching invoices. She read them silently, her eyes narrowing with each line. This changes things, she said. If she used embezzled HOA funds to finance the illegal seizure of your dog, that folds the theft into a broader fraud scheme. It's not just a bad decision, it's systematic abuse of power funded by stolen money. Can we connect that to other seizures? I asked. We're already looking into it. 2 other residents filed similar complaints this week. One had their garden destroyed for code violations, but the contractor who did it was never licensed. Another had a disabled ramp removed from their porch overnight. She's been doing this for years, I said, and no one stopped her. They were scared, Kessler replied. She weaponized bureaucracy, and people thought she was untouchable. Not anymore. 2 days later, Cheryl was formally indicted on 10 felony counts. The arraignment was held in a downtown courtroom packed with reporters, community members, and a few former HOA board members who now looked like they were wondering how they'd ever fallen in line behind her. She stood beside her lawyer in a beige suit that looked a size too stiff, her hair pulled back tight enough to lift her eyebrows. When the judge read the list of charges, her face barely moved. But when the prosecutor outlined the misuse of HOA funds, including the scheme to fabricate animal control documentation, her mouth twitched. That twitch didn't go unnoticed. Outside the courthouse, a small cluster of neighbors gathered around Miguel and me. Someone brought coffee. Dana, the teacher who'd once served on the board under Cheryl, passed out copies of a petition to formally restructure the HOA bylaws. Someone else handed out flyers for an emergency town hall. What happens if she pleads not guilty? Someone asked.
She already did, Miguel said.
But with the evidence piling up, they'll push for a plea deal. If not, she's going to trial. You think she'll flip on anyone? I shook my head. She wanted to be queen. Queens don't confess. Not until the tower door locks behind them. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood transformed. The community center hosted open meetings, with Gloria moderating and no one being silenced or talked over. Dana brought in a nonprofit legal advisor to help residents file for refunds on illegitimate fines. Miguel organized a team to comb through every financial record from the last 5 years. I became an unwilling figurehead, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because people saw what happened and realized they didn't have to be afraid anymore. One afternoon, while I was fixing a loose gutter on my porch, a man I didn't recognize walked up the driveway. Big guy, beard like a steel wool pad, calloused hands. He introduced himself as Tim, said he used to live 2 streets over. I moved out last year, he said. Cheryl hit me with foreclosure threats over a shed I built behind my garage. Said it violated the height limit. Did it?
No.
I checked 3 times. It wasn't even visible from the street. But she kept threatening to fine me daily until I took it down. I finally sold the place and moved. Couldn't take the stress. Why are you here now? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. I kept everything. Emails. Notices. Even a recording of her telling me she could make my life expensive if I didn't comply. I took it carefully, nodding. You just gave us another nail for the coffin. The next day, I delivered it directly to Kessler. She called back within hours.
This is gold, she said.
We're adding 2 more charges based on this extortion and falsification of official correspondence. That recording? It's damning. By the time Cheryl's preliminary hearing came around, the list of charges had grown again. The judge denied bail, citing risk of further fraud and community manipulation. Her attorney tried to argue that she was acting in the community's best interest. The prosecutor didn't even flinch. She created a hostile governance structure where dissent was punished with fabricated violations, he said. She used HOA funds for personal gain and retaliated against residents who questioned her authority. That is not civic service. That is authoritarianism, plain and simple. Cheryl's trial was scheduled for late spring. In the meantime, the neighborhood held its first open election in years. No secret ballots stuffed in mailboxes, no mandatory approval quorum that only ever seemed to favor Cheryl's picks. This time, people voted with their eyes wide open. Dana was elected president. Miguel took the treasurer role. I agreed to serve as a community liaison not because I wanted to, but because after everything, I knew how to spot the warning signs. The bylaws were rewritten with input from legal counsel. A third-party accounting firm was brought in. Residents who had been fined under Cheryl's false citations were reimbursed through a restitution fund created from what the county recovered during the investigation. And Cheryl? She sat in a cell awaiting trial, the only crown she wore now being an inmate ID tag clipped to a beige jumpsuit. I never once visited, never wrote, never thought about what she might say if we crossed paths again. What mattered was this. The neighborhood was ours again. Not hers. Not the HOA's.
Ours.
And Cooper? He still met me at the gate every single day, tail wagging, eyes bright, like he knew the whole world had finally been put back in its place. It was a Tuesday morning when the final domino tipped. The day before, Dana had called a special emergency HOA meeting. Not because of complaints, not because of a new violation this time. It was to vote on a formal resolution to permanently dissolve the old HOA structure and replace it with a resident-led cooperative. The difference was more than cosmetic. This new structure would require full transparency, rotating leadership, and third-party audits every 6 months. It was the final nail in the coffin of the regime Cheryl had built, and everyone in that room knew it. The vote wasn't even close. 42 residents showed up, and every hand went up except for one man who abstained, an elderly neighbor named Walt who mostly just did crosswords and didn't want to be involved in anything anymore. Fair enough. The motion passed. But just as the room began to buzz with a cautious kind of joy, Dana's phone lit up with a call from Detective Kessler. She stepped outside to take it, and when she returned, her face had lost all color. "She's being moved," Dana said. "They're transferring Cheryl to county jail tonight. Her home's officially being seized under a civil forfeiture order." I leaned forward. Seized? I thought that only happened after conviction. Normally, yes. But the DA filed a motion claiming there's overwhelming evidence the property was purchased using fraudulent HOA funds. The judge signed off. Miguel pushed his glasses up his nose. "Are they going to auction it off?" "Eventually," Dana said. But here's the part that matters. When they went back in with the warrant to catalog the property for forfeiture, they found more. "What kind of more?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "A hidden room. Behind the garage." Silence rippled through the room. It was disguised as part of the foundation. Concrete false wall, but the hinges were visible from the inside. They found records going back over a decade. Financial ledgers, communications with a private investigator, even a burner phone with encrypted messages. I stood up. "Wait, she hired a PI." Dana nodded. "Kessler says the PI was digging into residents. Background checks, employment histories, even credit scores." Miguel dropped his pen. "She was building blackmail files." Exactly. The rest of the meeting collapsed into a flurry of stunned conversation, but I slipped out quietly and walked home, Cooper trotting beside me. My hands were in my jacket pockets, but my mind was racing. Cheryl hadn't just stolen money. She hadn't just bullied people. She'd been laying the groundwork to control this neighborhood like a puppet master. And if Kessler was right, that meant some of those resignations from past board members hadn't been voluntary, they'd been forced. The next day, I met Kessler at the precinct. She walked me through the contents of the hidden room. Photocopies of birth certificates, driver's license numbers, even a file on me dated 3 weeks before she took Cooper. "She had notes on your financials," Kessler said. "Mortgage status, your business license, even your work schedule." She was planning something. She already did, Kessler said. We found a memo she drafted. She was planning to push a new set of HOA rules, mandatory inspections of all home-based businesses, increased annual dues, and a clause that would give the HOA first right of purchase if any home was foreclosed. I stared at her. That's not a neighborhood policy. That's a hostile takeover. She knew what she was doing. She studied state law, found every loophole she could. Is the DA going to expand the charges? They already have. They're adding racketeering and conspiracy to commit fraud. Later that week, I got a call from a man named Andrew Fallon. He was a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he wasn't calling to chat. We've opened a federal case, he said. The moment she used interstate wire transfers to move HOA funds through shell companies in Nevada and Arizona, she crossed into federal jurisdiction. He explained that they had reason to believe Cheryl hadn't been acting alone. Two of the shell companies used for laundering money had been incorporated by a law firm specializing in HOA management services, one that had been under quiet investigation for setting up similar schemes in gated communities across the state. She might have just been a small cog in a much larger machine, Fallon said. We'll keep you updated. By then, the neighborhood had transformed. The old HOA signs were gone, replaced with a simple wooden board at the front entrance that read, Resident Cooperative Welcome Home. No more patrolling. No more threat letters. Just a monthly bulletin with community updates and potluck dates. One afternoon, Miguel and I stood at the edge of the park while a crew of volunteers planted new hedges along the walking path. The budget had been freed up, now that it wasn't being siphoned into Cheryl's fake beautification fund. Funny, Miguel said, watching a group of kids ride by on bikes. If she just left people alone, she probably could have stayed in charge forever. She didn't want to lead, I said. She wanted control. Dana joined us a few minutes later, holding a sealed envelope. This was delivered to me by the county clerk, she said. Final restitution statement. I opened it. Inside was a breakdown of recovered funds. Over $72,000 had been returned to the community from Cheryl's assets. Another $15,000 from the seizure of the shell accounts. Most residents would receive refunds for illegitimate fines. The rest would go into a community trust protected by a third-party fiduciary. She thought no one would fight back, Dana said. She was wrong. 2 weeks later, Cheryl's trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the walls. Her defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming she'd been overwhelmed by administrative pressures.
The jury didn't buy it.
Testimony came from former board members, residents, financial experts, and even the private investigator she'd hired, who flipped once he realized he'd been implicated. It took less than 4 days for the jury to return a verdict.
Guilty.
On all counts. The judge sentenced her to 16 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole in 10. Restitution was ordered in full. Her assets were liquidated. The law firm that helped her set up the shell companies was also indicted after a joint federal investigation, and their license was suspended pending trial. After the sentencing, the judge made a rare statement. This case is a reminder of what happens when authority is left unchecked. Homeowners associations are meant to serve, not rule. This defendant treated her neighbors like subjects and her position like a scepter. That ends today. Outside, the neighborhood gathered.
No celebración.
Just relief. And clarity. That evening, I sat on the porch with Cooper curled against my leg, watching the sun fade behind the rooftops. A few kids tossed a football down the street. Someone was grilling nearby. It smelled like real life again. Dana stopped by with a clipboard, asking if I'd consider running for the new mediation committee. I told her I'd think about it. Just promise me one thing, she said. What's that? If I ever start bossing people around or citing bylaws in casual conversation, drag me off the board.
Deal.
She laughed, The kind of laugh that sounded like someone finally exhaling after holding it in for too long. As she walked back down the path, I looked at Cooper. "We did all right, huh?" He lifted his head, tail thudding once against the porch wood. For the first time in years, our neighborhood wasn't just a place to live. It was home.